A police officer called on his radio. "I need help at Millie's Diner. We have a big problem here." "Hang up, I'm talking to you, old man. This is about cops who picked on a black Army veteran at a restaurant." But then one quiet phone call changed everything. A normal morning at Millie's Diner turned into a scary situation when two police officers bothered a quiet black veteran named Raymond Cole. But when he made just one phone call, everything changed. It showed the real power of being brave, people helping each other, and a past that nobody knew about. The sun came up slowly over Southfield, Michigan. It made the windows of Millie's Diner look golden. Inside, the air smelled like fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and you could hear plates clinking together. The place was full of regular customers, truck drivers, nurses, old people. Each had their favorite table and things they always did. Raymond Cole sat at his usual spot by the window. He was a man who liked doing the same things every day. His green army jacket had patches at the elbows and was worn out at the collar. You could tell it was really old. He was quiet, careful about everything, and always ate alone. The workers knew him, but he was also mysterious to them. Becca was a young waitress with her hair in a bun and pen marks on her hands. She always said hi to him with a nice smile. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." The usual, she'd ask, even though she already knew what he wanted. Black coffee, 2 eggs cooked, sunny side up, and wheat toast. Millie owned the restaurant. She wiped her hands on her apron and nodded at him. It was like a silent hello between two people who both lost someone in a war. Raymond's wallet was beat up. His shoes were worn but clean. He had an old flip phone that looked weird, in a world where everyone had smartphones. He was a man with lots of stories, but he hardly ever talked about them. Instead, he just watched, looking at the world with eyes that had seen too much bad stuff, but still had hope. But under the surface of this peaceful morning, trouble was coming. Even though Raymond did the same thing every day, someone was about to question why he was there in the most embarrassing way possible. This wouldn't test how patient he was, but how much respect he had for himself and if the community would help him. That the trouble started when the bell over the door rang. A man in a fancy suit walked in looking mad and in a hurry. He looked around the restaurant like he didn't like what he saw, then sat down at a table not far from Raymond. He snapped his fingers rudely to get Becca's attention, then complained loudly about how slow the service was. Then he looked at Raymond, noticing his old jacket and flip phone. "Excuse me, miss," he said to Becca, talking loud enough for everyone to hear. "How can the owner let someone who looks like a homeless person take up a good table all morning? It's bad for business." The whole restaurant got quiet. The bacon stopped sizzling. People stopped using their forks and knives. All the regular customers turned their heads, looking shocked and angry. Becca just stood there, her face turning red with anger. Behind the counter, Millie slammed down a frying pan, her eyes getting really narrow and mean. Raymond Cole slowly looked up from his plate. He didn't say anything, just looked right at the man in the suit. In his calm eyes, there was no anger, just the heavy feeling of someone who had seen and been through a lot of bad things. It was a look that made the businessman feel scared. And in that tense moment, a truck driver at the next table put his fork down with a loud clink. The whole diner seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would be the first to stick up for one of their own. The sun came up slowly over Southfield, Michigan. It made the windows of Millie's Diner look golden. Inside, the air smelled like fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and you could hear plates clinking together. The place was full of regular customers, truck drivers, nurses, old people. Each had their favorite table and things they always did. Raymond Cole sat at his usual spot by the window. He was a man who liked doing the same things every day. His green army jacket had patches at the elbows and was worn out at the collar. You could tell it was really old. He was quiet, careful about everything, and always ate alone. The workers knew him, but he was also mysterious to them. Becca was a young waitress with her hair in a bun and pen marks on her hands. She always said hi to him with a nice smile. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." The usual, she'd ask, even though she already knew what he wanted. Black coffee, 2 eggs cooked, sunny side up, and wheat toast. Millie owned the restaurant. She wiped her hands on her apron and nodded at him. It was like a silent hello between two people who both lost someone in a war. Raymond's wallet was beat up. His shoes were worn but clean. He had an old flip phone that looked weird, in a world where everyone had smartphones. He was a man with lots of stories, but he hardly ever talked about them. Instead, he just watched, looking at the world with eyes that had seen too much bad stuff, but still had hope. But under the surface of this peaceful morning, trouble was coming. Even though Raymond did the same thing every day, someone was about to question why he was there in the most embarrassing way possible. This wouldn't test how patient he was, but how much respect he had for himself and if the community would help him. That the trouble started when the bell over the door rang. A man in a fancy suit walked in looking mad and in a hurry. He looked around the restaurant like he didn't like what he saw, then sat down at a table not far from Raymond. He snapped his fingers rudely to get Becca's attention, then complained loudly about how slow the service was. Then he looked at Raymond, noticing his old jacket and flip phone. "Excuse me, miss," he said to Becca, talking loud enough for everyone to hear. "How can the owner let someone who looks like a homeless person take up a good table all morning? It's bad for business. The whole restaurant got quiet. The bacon stopped sizzling. People stopped using their forks and knives. All the regular customers turned their heads, looking shocked and angry. Becca just stood there, her face turning red with anger. Behind the counter, Millie slammed down a frying pan, her eyes getting really narrow and mean. Raymond Cole slowly looked up from his plate. He didn't say anything, just looked right at the man in the suit. In his calm eyes, there was no anger, just the heavy feeling of someone who had seen and been through a lot of bad things. It was a look that made the businessman feel scared, and in that tense moment, a truck driver at the next table put his fork down with a loud clink. The whole diner seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would be the first to stick up for one of their own. The phone call changed everything. Maddox hesitated, feeling like he wasn't in control anymore. Crowley looked around nervously, his hand moving toward his radio, but not actually using it. The air in Millie's diner felt really heavy with everyone watching, much heavier than the smell of coffee and bacon. A few customers, an old couple from a corner table, a nurse who was done with work, a big construction worker covered in white dust, stood up from their tables. They didn't rush or make a big scene. They just moved quietly and carefully to make a loose half-circle around Raymond's table. Nobody said anything, but all of them being there together was like a silent wall that couldn't be broken. Their message was clear. He's not alone. He's one of us. Becca, with her young face, pale but determined, moved to stand right next to Raymond's side. Her hands were shaking a little as she put one hand on the back of his chair. You don't have to go anywhere, Mr. Cole. Millie stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron in a slow, careful way that didn't hide how angry she was. Her voice was steady and strong like the old building itself. He's welcome here. Always has been. Always will be. Maddox's fake toughness, which was already weak, started to fall apart under the weight of so many angry eyes. He puffed out his chest, falling back on police rules. You're all getting in the way of police business. This is obstruction. No, officer, Millie shot back, taking another step forward. This is me protecting my customer in my restaurant. You're on private property, and I'm telling you that the only one causing trouble here is you. The standoff continued, making the air in the room feel tight. Maddox, realizing his authority was gone, finally reached for his radio. Dispatch, I need backup at Millie's diner. We have a dangerous situation. For the first time, his voice showed he wasn't sure what to do. Crowley gave him a desperate look and whispered, Maddox, maybe we should just wait outside and let this calm down. Through all of this, Raymond stayed incredibly calm. His breathing was normal, his posture didn't change. He had faced bigger threats than an arrogant cop with hurt feelings. He looked slowly at each person who stood with him, at Gus the trucker, at the nurse whose name he didn't know, at young Becca, at Millie. A flicker of deep, unspoken thankfulness warmed his tired eyes. Just then, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. It arrived quietly but with authority. A man in a tailored navy blue coat, crisp white shirt, and perfectly shiny shoes got out. He moved with purpose and in a way that made everyone respect him right away. He walked into the diner, the bell ringing as he came in. His sharp eyes looked at the whole scene. Officers, Maddox, and Crowley. Maddox straightened up, relieved to see what he thought was his boss. Yes, sir, we're responding to a report. The man smoothly pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open to show a badge. Michael Sterling, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. The diner, which was already quiet, became completely silent. The construction worker let out a low whistle. Sterling's voice was calm, but it had more authority than Maddox's. I was alerted by a keyword flag on the police radio. Suspicious individual, possible loitering, Millie's diner. My division watches for keywords that suggest possible civil rights violations. This one had all the warning signs. He turned his attention from the officers to Raymond. Mr. Cole, are you being refused service or asked to leave this place? Raymond shook his head. His voice was rough but clear. Just having breakfast. Same as always. Sterling faced Maddox again. Have you personally seen any crime? Any disruptive or threatening behavior from this man? Maddox hesitated, his face turning red and blotchy. No, but the person who complained reported, double quotes. Sterling cut him off, his tone like ice. The person who complained is not here. You are. Without seeing a crime or a real threat, you have no reason for this action. Your quote, presence here is intimidation. Please give me your names and badge numbers. Crowley complied immediately, almost gratefully. Maddox, boiling with embarrassment, did the same. Sterling then spoke to the whole room. Has Mr. Cole ever caused any trouble here before? A chorus of no and never, and he's the best customer we have filled the air? Sterling nodded, like a judge making a final decision. Officers, you're no longer needed here. I will be following up with your precinct captain. Maddox opened his mouth to argue, but Sterling's steady stare shut him up for good. The two officers turned and left, their defeat obvious to everyone. A collective sigh of relief swept through the diner. Millie pulled Becca into a tight hug. The customers, their job done, began to go back to their seats. But the atmosphere had changed forever. There was a new sense of pride, a fierce togetherness, of having seen something important. Raymond sat quietly, sipping his coffee as the room settled down. Sterling came over and sat across from him in the now empty booth. You handled that with remarkable dignity, Mr. Cole. Raymond gave a small nod. Sometimes you just have to stand your ground. Sterling smiled faintly and signaled to Becca. I'll have a coffee. Black. He turned back to Raymond. My father served in Vietnam. He used to say that the hardest battles were the ones he fought after he came home. He'd have respected the hell out of what you and your friends did here today. He slid a business card across the table. My direct line. You shouldn't need it. I have a feeling this community looks after its own, but it's there just in case. Raymond looked at the card, then back at the man from the Department of Justice. For the first time all morning, he spoke more than a few words. Peace is a fragile thing. You fight for it. You see things you can't unsee. You come home and you just want to find a quiet corner of it for yourself. He looked around the diner at Millie, now laughing behind the counter, at the trucker giving him a thumbs up. This is my corner. Sterling nodded in understanding. He drank his coffee, and the two men sat in comfortable silence, two strangers connected by a shared sense of what's right. When he left, the diner was once again just a diner, bathed in the golden morning light. But for Raymond Cole and the community of Millies, it was a fortress, its foundation stronger than ever. But the story didn't end there. A young man at the counter, a college student named Leo, had filmed the entire thing on his phone. Shaken and inspired by what he'd seen, he uploaded it with a simple caption. This happened this morning at Millie's Diner in Southfield. Me. This is what standing up for your neighbor looks like. Within hours, the video was no longer his. It belonged to the internet, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. The raw, unedited footage captured everything with stark clarity. The officer's aggressive, unwarranted questioning. The quiet, resolute solidarity of the patrons rising from their seats. The authoritative arrival of Michael Sterling, and the unwavering dignity with which he dismantled the officer's case. Most powerfully, it captured Raymond Cole at its center, a silent pillar of strength, his calm gaze more potent than any shout. Comments poured in by the tens of thousands, a digital flood of emotion. Veterans groups shared it with the caption, "This is how you hold the line." Civil rights activists hailed it as a perfect example of community defense. No slogans, no signs, just decency. One popular comment read, others were filled with outrage, demanding the badge numbers of Maddox and Crowley and calling for their immediate dismissal. People didn't just see an incident, they saw a story with a lesson playing out in a small American diner. Reporters began calling Millie's, the phone ringing off the hook until Becca was forced to unplug it. A local news van parked across the street, its satellite dish pointed at the small brick building as if it were the center of the universe. Becca, thrust into the role of spokesperson, handled the media with a grace that mirrored her mentor's, her voice trembling not with fear but with pride. Mr. Cole is a good man, she told one persistent journalist. He's family. That's all you need to know. But the biggest surprise came when Raymond's past was discovered. An aging, investigative journalist in Washington, D.C. saw the video and felt a jolt of recognition. He didn't recognize the face, weathered by time, but the posture. The unyielding calm in the face of uniformed authority. It reminded him of old black and white photos from the 60s. After a day of digging through archives and making calls to old contacts, he broke the story that stunned the nation. Raymond Cole was not just a veteran, he was a former high-ranking official in the Department of Justice, a one-time director of federal civil rights oversight, who had spent 3 decades fighting the very injustice he had just faced. He had marched with Dr. King and Selma. He had been a key lawyer in landmark desegregation cases. He had written policies that protected the rights of millions, his work forming the bedrock of the very division Michael Sterling now represented. Yet he had never sought the spotlight, always preferring to work quietly behind the scenes, letting others stand at the podium. The revelation sent a secondary shockwave across the country. The quiet hero of Millie's Diner was, in fact, a forgotten giant. The news reached Michael Sterling in his D.C. office. He stared at the article on his screen, a photo of a young, determined Raymond Cole beside a grainy picture from the March on Washington. He felt a profound sense of humility. He had intervened to protect a citizen, only to find he had been defending one of the architects of his own life's work. He immediately found a number and made the call. "Mr. Cole," Sterling said when Raymond answered his flip phone. "It's Michael." "Sterling, sir. I saw the news. If I had any idea who you were, Raymond's voice was gentle. "You did your job, Michael. You did what was right without needing to know a name or a history. That's the whole point. That's the system working." Now, against all his wishes, Raymond was thrust into the center of a national conversation he had spent a lifetime avoiding. One afternoon, Millie sat with him in his usual booth, the diner quiet after the lunch rush. Her eyes were filled with concern. "You okay with all this attention, Ray?" Raymond managed to smile, weary but deeply grateful. "I never wanted it, Millie. All I ever wanted was this," he said, gesturing to the quiet diner. "But maybe my quiet time is over. Maybe it's time." Becca, refilling his coffee, chimed in. "You showed all of us how to stand up for something that matters, more than any headline." Raymond looked at her, then at Millie. the two women who were the anchors of his peaceful world. "It was never about me," he said, his voice gaining a familiar strength, the quiet authority of a man who knew his purpose. "It's about what's right. For 50 years, I believed the fight was in the courtroom and in the halls of Congress. But what happened here? It proved that a law is only as strong as the community willing to uphold it." He looked out the window at the world that was suddenly watching him. Maybe the work isn't just writing the rules anymore. Maybe it's reminding people why they matter in the first place. The following Monday, the bell above the door of Millie's diner chimed its familiar greeting as Raymond Cole stepped inside. The usual morning chatter subsided, but this time, the hush that fell was different. It wasn't laced with suspicion or curiosity, it was a silence of profound respect, of shared experience. Every eye was on him, and in every eye he saw a reflection of the unity that had been forged in the fire of that morning. He paused by the counter, his gaze sweeping across the room. He didn't walk to his usual booth. Instead, he stood in the center of the diner, a place he had never occupied before. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, yet it reached every corner of the room, every listening heart. "Good morning," he began, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. "I know many of you have seen the video. I've heard the word hero being used. I need to be clear about something." He took a slow breath. "This was never about me. It was about the right of every person, every single one of you, to be treated with dignity. It's a right that shouldn't depend on what you look like, what uniform you wear or don't wear, where you come from, or what you've been through." He looked directly at Becca, at Millie, and then at the faces of the regulars who had stood with him, his silent guard. "I served my country because I believed in its promise. I still do. But that promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness isn't an abstract thing for politicians to debate. It's the right to sit in a diner and eat a meal in peace. It's the right to be seen as a neighbor, not a threat." Emotion thickened his voice, the quiet man allowing his vulnerability to show. "I am not a hero. I am a man. I have made my share of mistakes. I have been afraid more times than I can count. I have doubted myself. But I have learned one thing that I know to be true. When we stand together quietly, firmly, with decency as our only weapon, we remind the world what true strength and dignity look like. You all did that. You were the heroes of that morning." The room was utterly still. A woman in a nearby booth wiped a tear from her eye. Then Gus, the trucker, rose slowly to his feet and began to applaud. It wasn't the raucous applause of a crowd at a sporting event, but the deep, respectful, sustained appreciation of a community that knew it had been fundamentally changed. One by one, everyone else stood and joined him. A week later, Michael Sterling was back, sitting across from Raymond in his usual booth. The lunchtime rush was over, and a peaceful quiet had settled over the diner. Raymond Sterling began. The story has had an impact back in D.C. It's reminded a lot of people in corner offices what our work is really about. The Department of Justice would like to formally offer you an honorary advisory role to the Civil Rights Division." Raymond slowly stirred his coffee, his gaze fixed on the swirling liquid. "I'm retired, Michael. I've had my time in meeting rooms. I like my routine, my peace and quiet." Sterling smiled, understanding the hesitation completely. "I know. This wouldn't be for you. It wouldn't be about flying to D.C. or sitting in meetings. It would be about us calling you. It's for the young attorneys who have only ever read about the struggles in books. It's for the agents in the field who need to hear a voice of experience. It's for the ones who still need someone to listen, someone who has truly stood on the ground where these rights are won and lost." Raymond considered this. It wasn't a request for him to rejoin the world he'd left behind, but an invitation to be a bridge. He agreed, on one condition. "The work doesn't happen in Washington," he said, tapping the table. "It happens here. I'll accept if the DOJ will help sponsor a series of monthly community forums on civil rights and respect, right here in Millie's." The first forum was packed. The diner buzzed with an energy it had never known. Veterans sat next to high school students, business owners shared tables with activists, and in a booth near the back, Officer Crowley sat by himself, listening intently. Raymond, true to his nature, spoke little. He opened the meeting with a simple question. "What does being a good neighbor mean to you?" Then he listened, his presence alone enough to anchor the conversation, to ensure every voice was heard with respect. The effects rippled outward. Inspired by the story, online donations poured into Southfield's local veterans support group, funding a new outreach program. Millie's diner became a landmark, a symbol of quiet resistance and communal dignity. Millie, ever practical, expanded the diner's small pay-forward board into a large chalkboard wall where customers could prepay for meals for anyone in need. "A community feeds its own." The heading read. In her cheerful script, reporters still tried to get an exclusive interview with the quiet lion of Southfield, but Raymond politely declined every request, preferring to let the actions of the community speak for themselves. Becca, however, found her voice. She started a blog called The Sharpie and the Shield, writing about small acts of kindness and the courage it takes to be decent in a divided world. It quickly gained a devoted following. The Southfield Police Department underwent a seismic shift. Officers Maddox and Crowley were placed on administrative leave, pending a thorough internal review. Crowley was reinstated after completing additional training and speaking at the first forum about what he learned. Maddox, facing dismissal, requested a meeting. He found Raymond at the diner one morning and, with a humility that seemed foreign to him, apologized. "I saw a jacket, not a man," Maddox said, his voice strained. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." Raymond looked at the humbled officer, seeing not an enemy but a man who had lost his way. "We all have our blind spots, son," he said calmly. "The important thing is to learn to see." The town of Southfield changed in small, incremental ways. People started greeting each other more often on the street. The new police chief made community engagement the core of his policy. The diner remained a sanctuary, its welcome more explicit than ever. Raymond Cole continued to sit by the window each morning, sipping his black coffee and reading the paper. To a stranger, he was still the quiet, regular, but to his community, his presence was a living reminder, a testament to the simple, profound truth that the deepest changes often begin with the quietest stands. The impact of that morning at Millie's diner rippled outward. National news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a lesson in dignity, solidarity, and the power of community. Raymond's honorary role with the Department of Justice led to policy changes, new guidelines for police interactions, increased support for veterans, and expanded civil rights education. The local veterans group grew, offering more services and support. Donations continued, inspired by Raymond's humility and strength. Becca's blog gained a following, spreading stories of everyday courage and kindness. Millie's Diner became a destination. People traveled from across the state to sit at Raymond's table, to thank him, to learn from him. But Raymond remained unchanged. He still wore his patched army jacket, still paid in cash, still tipped Becca with a quiet nod. One evening, as the sun set over Southfield, Raymond sat alone at his table. Millie joined him, 2 mugs of coffee between them. "Did you ever think one phone call could change so much?" she asked. That Raymond smiled, eyes twinkling. "Sometimes it only takes one voice to remind us who we are." The story ends as it began, with Raymond, a quiet man in a small diner, a symbol of dignity, respect, and the quiet power of standing one's ground. Sometimes it only takes one voice to remind us who we are.